Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It is brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. And, of course, the Eagles pick up another win last night. Geoff Mosher's here from the Inside the Birds podcast, and he's ready to break it down, tell us what he saw in another game where the Eagles have to come from behind 17-7 at half. And then how does a game finish in overtime, 37-34, and just a wild ending? The Jake Elliott kick, some huge plays on both sides of the ball, a key interception, so they get that turnover that you're looking for, and then Jalen Hurts takes things over. Geoff Mosher is here on a Football at 4 Monday. What's going on, Moshe?
Hey, Mike, what's going on? It's what a crazy game that was, right? I mean, all the emotions just in the final, 30 seconds and then overtime. Another week that we talk about the Philadelphia Eagles, and as I said in the podcast that came out this morning from the postgame show yesterday, Mike, I'm having trouble as a reporter, as a writer, as someone who likes to be very creative with my wording, having trouble finding new ways to just, use the term resilient or mentally tough or having resolve, because every week they do the same thing, and I keep saying the same thing. I want to try to find new words.
Yeah, I mean, resiliency, mental toughness, these are the things we keep using to describe this team most. And I think why it's so unique and so different is that when you look at great teams, you generally talk about teams that are winning decisively, not winning by being on the ropes. And I think that is what makes this Eagles team so unique and so different.
Yeah, and you got to judge sort of teams on a case-by-case basis by who they are and what they've shown. Because if you look back last year, the Minnesota Vikings were, I think they were a 13-4 football team, which on the surface is pretty good. And I'm pretty sure that 12 of those 13 wins, if not all 13, were by one possession. I mean, just go through and look. And that was like a living dangerously type team last year that lost to the Giants in the playoffs. And a lot of people said, well, gee, they skated on thin ice all year long. It doesn't surprise me that they lost in the first round, because eventually you're going to play that one possession game where it doesn't go your way, right? But this is different. If you go back and look, the Vikings didn't, all those one possession wins they had came against teams that weren't very good last year. So they were just squeaking by to beat bad teams. This Eagles team, you don't feel the same way about all these games that they're hanging around or letting the other team hanging around, or where they're starting slow, because they're in the middle of what was supposed to be a murderer's row type of schedule, and they're playing really good teams. And maybe the Buffalo Bills aren't really good, but they're better than average, and they clearly have a great quarterback who can take a game out over by himself, and they're winning these games. And to me, when you make the long-term projection, you would say, I think that's going to make them better off when they get to the playoffs, because I don't think they're going to have the kind of cakewalk they had last year with the Giants in the first round and then a rookie quarterback who gets hurt on the first play of the game in the conference championship, as opposed to last year's cardiac kids Minnesota Vikings team that was clearly more flawed. That makes sense? Because I know some people might want to say the Eagles are living dangerously and that's going to catch up to them, but I think this team is actually showing more fortitude than what you saw from the Vikings last year.
Yeah. No, I think your point's interesting. Now, Rex Ryan said this morning, I don't know if you heard this, he kind of described the Eagles, as a boxer who keeps winning by decision. They don't have that knockout blow. Do you look at this team in that fashion, and is that a deterrent? Like, if you're Floyd Mayweather and you don't win a lot of knockouts, are you still not the best middleweight? Now he's saying you're like a heavyweight that just doesn't have the ability to knock their opponent out. Do you view that as an accurate assessment?
I understand where it's coming from. I think given the state of the Eagles defense, given the state of their secondary, and the issues that they've had trying to compensate for it, it does feel like they're always going to struggle to put a team away. I mean, they were up, 27-7 this year. I think it was on the Vikings, right? And that game was a lot closer by the end than you thought, because the Vikings passing game sort of came alive there in the second half. And, same thing with Dallas. The Dallas just had its way at times with the Eagles secondary. And I think that when you're playing really good teams and good quarterbacks, which they will do in the playoffs, I think that they're going to give up points, and they're going to have to live this life against good teams for the rest of the year. Now, that last 3 games that they play against the Giants in Arizona, if those are like one-possession games and all the starters are playing and everything like that, then we're going to have some conversations about what's going on with the team, because those are some teams that they should really overwhelm and dominate. But, when they play good teams with good quarterbacks and good passing games, I agree with that assessment that it's going to be hard for them to just bury those teams.
Mosh, Gil threw out at the end of our last segment this question, and we're going to throw it your way. One improvement the Eagles need to make is blank. Fill in the blank.
One improvement the Eagles. You're asking me what an improvement that a 10-1 team has.
I know. It's crazy.
Protecting the ball, then, right? Yeah, protecting the ball. I mean, turnovers can kill you, and that is, for the opponent the last 2 weeks, it's been the drops, right? Kansas City wins if they don't drop the ball. Buffalo wins if James Cook probably doesn't drop that first quarter wheel route, and if Gabe Davis gets the ball. That wasn't a drop, but that was miscommunication. But for the Eagles, I think maybe some of our conversation now, they could have probably pulled away in some of those games if they didn't turn the ball over, and certainly their only loss was because they had 4 of them, right? So they are much more of a turnover, giveaway-prone team this year than they were last year. And in one-possession games, you have that game where maybe you have 2 giveaways, and you're just not as careful as you are. And it's a playoff game, right? Because now every discussion we have is going to basically be about, can this happen in the playoff game? That could be their Achilles heel, Ryan.
Brian Johnson has been a popular name that has been brought up for better or for worse, including myself at times. It's been for worse in the past, but at this point, I don't know how I can give him anything but praise. This team's 10-1 for a reason, right? And I think it's just his relationship with Jalen Hurts, clearly, that has helped this team propel and be resilient, amongst other things. But talk about what you saw yesterday from the game plan and the play calling and the adjustments that were made.
Because Mosh, by the way, Frank Reich getting fired today. We've already got multiple text messages asking for the Eagles to bring Reich back.
I laugh at that so much because, Frank Reich with the Eagles got a tremendous amount of accolade. But if you look at it, he was not the play caller with the Eagles. Doug Peterson was, right? And then he goes and becomes the play caller head coach in Indianapolis, gets fired. Goes and comes to the play caller head coach in Carolina, gives up play calling duty, gets fired. And people, I'm assuming what you're hearing from fans is, let's bring in Frank Reich, not just as an advisor, but to call the plays instead of Brian Johnson, which is sort of comical at this point. Brian Johnson, you heard Nick Sirianni talk today about his calmness, right? And then one thing I can say about Brian, just from what I think I can glean from him watching the Eagles play, is that their play calling doesn't suggest panic when they're down. You don't start to see wide receiver option passes. You don't start to see anything they do out of characteristics because they're down in games and they feel like they can't get back in unless they do something drastically different. So he's been consistent. Yes, there have been times you can question play calling. I also have difficulty knowing how RPOs are, saying whether it's Brian Johnson who's not making the right call or whether at times it's Jalen Hurts who's making the decision at the line of scrimmage whether to throw, whether to hand it off, and whether some of that's on him. But at the end of the day, you scored 31 points or 34 points in a game. I mean, they're averaging well over 20, 25 points a game, right?
They're third in the league. They're third in the league. They average 28 points a game. They're third in the league there, and they're 9th in yardage.
Right. So that's pretty good, if you ask me. And I don't think he's doing as bad of a job as people get. We said from the beginning, not going to look the exact same as last year. It hasn't. But at the end of the day, you would love to see a little bit better third down conversion. They're not great at that. But remember how poorly they started off in red zone in the last 5-6 games? They've been so much better at that as well. I think they're back to being a top 10 red zone team. So I don't have as many qualms with Brian Johnson as people do.
All right, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, and, of course, their post-game podcast is up at InsideTheBirds.com and wherever you listen to your podcast. You know, one of the things I thought was pretty interesting in the game, in the first half, you know, they struggled offensively. We talk about Brian Johnson here. What did they do? What did Brian Johnson do in the second half to kind of unlock some of this stuff that enabled them to go from 7 to 37?
Yeah, you know, I do think that a couple of their big plays, and obviously their 3 second-half touchdown passes were in the air. They're touchdown passes, but the run game did set up a few of them, getting DeAndre Smith involved. I thought was important. I mean, you have trouble kind of praising anybody other than the quarterback and the wide receiver on the scramble drill touchdown from Hurts to Olamide Zaccheaus. I'm not quite sure that that's how it was drawn up on the play sheet, but it worked. But obviously, you know, they get the turnover from James Bradbury. That sets up, I think, the A.J. Brown touchdown. It was nice to have a short field there. I believe there was a run on that drive as well that set it up. So I thought that there was a little bit more balance. But, you know, really it was obviously Jalen Hurts making some really good throws and having guys like Zaccheaus to make that catch, and A.J. Brown, and, of course, Devontae Smith, who is really kind of starting to come alive now over the last 3 or 4 games.
Yeah, talk about what Devontae Smith has been able to do in this passing attack, right? It's just like he can go invisible for a week at a time, and then he just stays ready. And really, 2 really big games, I think, over the last 4. Obviously, over 100 yards yesterday, a big touchdown catch. But just talk about the impact that he's made and how nice it is, how much of a luxury it is to have him on the opposite side of A.J. Brown.
Yeah, I just don't know if there's, you know, other than maybe the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle tandem in Miami, you know, which is probably a more explosive combination, but I don't know if there's a more difficult combination of wide receivers to stop, just from a technical standpoint, as good of a route runner as Devontae Smith is, a contested catch player that belies like his size, his ability. I mean, he caught that touchdown between two, skied to catch that touchdown, and we've seen that quite a bit from Devontae Smith, who isn't the biggest guy in the world. And of course, you've got A.J. Brown, and I think people felt like if A.J. Brown wasn't getting 125 yards a game like he did for 6 straight games, then the Eagles' offense would struggle. But he hasn't really had a big 100-yard outburst in several weeks, and they've still been able to move the ball well. And this is all without Dallas Goedert the last 2 games. And you get a guy like Zaccheaus who steps in and gives you his first touchdown catch in like 8 weeks, right? And it winds up being huge. I just think that the total pass-catching artillery that they have is really good. They made smart signings. Obviously, Julio Jones can step in at any time and make a play as well. So you just have trouble looking around the league and saying that there's 2 better wide receivers.
I want to get some little news and notes with Geoff Mosher here from the Inside the Birds podcast. Josina Anderson reporting that the Eagles now have some renewed interest in Shaq Lawson. Give us some thoughts from you on the linebacking situation. Is Lawson a guy that's like, hey, they got to go get this guy, or maybe if not him, somebody else? Shaq Leonard. What did I say? Lawson? I'm sorry. Shaq Leonard.
Not Ty Lawson. Was arguing. Yeah, well, Shaq Lawson was trying to pick fights with fans.
He was the one he was the one that took a swing at the fans. So give us your thoughts on the linebacker spot and Shaq Leonard. To me, I mean, he just visited with Dallas. They haven't brought him in, so I guess that says something. But what do you make of the linebacking spot now with Cunningham with a hamstring issue?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I sort of hate to make these kind of statements without any type of watching on tape or seeing really what the player is at this point, and I haven't had a chance. But, you know, I do tend to fall back on there's a reason that the Colts weren't having a terrible year. I mean, yeah, they lost Anthony Richardson, but they're competitive, right? There's a reason that not only did they release Shaq Leonard, but absorbed a lot of money in doing so. I mean, and they benched him. I mean, it's not because he was playing so great. So they obviously the Colts feel he's a deteriorated player, and they were willing to absorb a really big pay cut, which to me means that they just don't think that there's a way to get him back to that level, even in a part-time role or whatever, or it's not worth it to have him on the roster at that dollar figure. So they're going to eat that big money. So that tells me he's a declining player. Now, people thought that about Zach Cunningham, and that's why he was on the street, and he played really well for the Eagles, exceptionally well. So there's something to be said about even a player who might be declining stepping into a situation where there's better players around him and playing well. So do I think it could make some sense? Sure. I mean, Dallas obviously has a very good defense, and they're looking at him too. But I would caution and say I don't think that this is like make or break. That if the Eagles don't get Shaq Leonard, then all hope is lost. And even if Zach Cunningham's hurt, there's just this is going to be their downfall and all that. Because I just can't believe I have to think the writing on the wall is that he's a declining player.
Well, forget if not him, but go ahead. I'm almost sort of interested in like a social science experiment of if the Cowboys sign him, for all the Eagles fans who are saying how they got to get him. Watch how fast he becomes what I'm saying, like a declining player and over the hill and not that good. If the Cowboys wind up signing him, because it's the Cowboys that are doing it, right? So, yeah, exactly. Well, somebody, the minute that you post something about it, you got to get him before the Cowboys do. But I guess if not him, do you think they're at a point here where they need some more linebacker? They played Christian Ellis almost 30 snaps yesterday. I don't know what you thought of him, but would they feel comfortable playing Nick Morrow and Christian Ellis a full complement of snaps for the next 2-3 weeks?
Well, here's what I find really interesting, Mike. Go back to the fourth quarter, right? And Cunningham's out of the game. Christian Ellis is in. And I thought it was a really smart tactical move by Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator now for the Bills. If you notice, when they scored that go-ahead touchdown, there was a lot of running. There was a lot of Josh Allen under center handing the ball off. What did they run the ball 5 times in a row and 7 out of 9 times? All of a sudden, the Bills, who never want to run the ball that much, never go under center, are running the ball and doing it effectively. And to me, that was clearly Joe Brady seeing there's no Fletcher Cox. They didn't have Milton Williams to start, and now they're down Zach Cunningham. We need to score. We need to be efficient, not turn the ball over. We're going to run. And it worked. They were very effective with that running game. Now, the Eagles' run got a little better in overtime there because they obviously saw what was going on. But for a while, it was working. Now you have San Francisco coming up, and nobody loves to run the ball more between the tackles and around the and everywhere than the San Francisco 49ers. So, yeah, I would say there's concern. Concern to the point where I don't know that you just plug Shaq Leonard in there and you think you're great, grand and wonderful now. I mean, he wouldn't even have been with the team and in this defense for however many days if they sign him. So, to me, you've got Christian Ellis no matter what next to Nick Morrow against the 49ers. And, yeah, I think that's going to be a concern because of the way the 49ers play football.
All right, Geoff Mosher, InsideTheBirds.com, the Inside the Birds podcast, which is on all podcasting platforms and wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, check out the Inside the Birds YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. You've got that. Brian Johnson, by the way, Adam Schefter mentioning today that he's going to be a top candidate for a head coaching job. So the Eagles might need another offensive coordinator at the end, but that's way down the line. We'll talk to Geoff about the Niners when we talk to him on Wednesday. Adam's here tomorrow. We got a big game this week in Philadelphia. It is Eagles-Niners, and the Eagles are 10-1 after beating the Bills on Sunday. Thank you, Geoff.
You got it, guys. Have a good one.